Welcome to this meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Tabby Joy. I'm chair of the committee. This meeting is going to be streamed live to Cheltenham Borough Council YouTube channel. So if you ask a question at this meeting, you will be deemed to have consented to be filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for broadcasting and or training purposes. So we're not expecting to have a fire alarm tonight. If it does sound, please make your way to the nearest fire exit because it would be a real fire. So item number 1 is apologies, which we have received from Councillor Chandler and Councillor Allen. I have received some questions from Councillor Allen as well, so I'll try to ask those as we go along, if that's okay. There shouldn't be any further apologies or substitutions, but have we been advised of any further ones? I don't think so.
No.
Amazing. Cool, thank you. So item number 2, do any members have any declarations of interest that they need to declare? Oh, Councillor Pinninger, go ahead.
Agenda item 9, indices multiple deprivation progress report. My wife is the Wellbeing and Health coordinator for West Cheltenham, so she's actually mentioned in the report. Okay.
Thanks so much, that's really helpful. Does anyone else have anything else? Amazing, thank you so much, that's brilliant. So we're going back on minutes of the last meeting, so item number 3. This was so we've circulated the minutes of the 9th of September meeting with this agenda. Does anyone have any suggestions of amendments they'd like to make to it or clarifications? We're all good with that? Class, okay. So I'd like to move, if that's okay, just to take a vote. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting? Anyone who's in attendance? Amazing, amazing. Brilliant. Cool, thanks so much, that's perfect. So that's all done and I will sign those minutes now, just so I can get that sorted out. Brilliant. And so we haven't actually received any public or member questions over item 4. No calls for actions and petitions, but always happy to reevaluate that and welcome to have any kind of public engagement on these things. If it's okay, I'd like to request the cabinet briefing on item 0.5. Tonight, unfortunately, as Councillor Hay wasn't able to make it, I'd really like to welcome Councillor Jeffries, our deputy leader. If you have just a broad brushstrokes update, or if there's anything you'd like to notify us of, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the leader sends her apologies. She's away representing Cheltenham at the Local Government Association conference. Always doing our bidding is our leader. Just one item really to update you on, and that is that quite be aware the ongoing conversations around the sale of Gloucestershire Airport. Well, the leader received an invitation to attend a scrutiny meeting. Unfortunately, this clashed with, I think, our full council meeting, so unable to attend that. But then actually in conversations made the suggestion as to why shouldn't it be a joint scrutiny sort of conversation, you know, Gloucester scrutiny and our scrutiny, why have one shareholder scrutinising one side of things. So I believe there has been some ongoing conversations with the chair of scrutiny. I think there's been some email traffic. So just wanted to draw your attention to the possibility of a joint scrutiny conversation with Gloucester. I know that the chair will undoubtedly pick that up, but the leader wanted me to make you aware. I think the email actually came in today with some dates and so forth. So I'm a little bit behind the curve. So just to make you aware of that, that is a potential moving forward, obviously in the gift of the chair and you as committee members. I've got nothing other specific to update the committee on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that, because you're right, it's a fully emerging situation. I do have a point of clarity to make on it, just because we've had a couple of discussions. Would you like to hear those now? We can bump it forward if you've got somewhere else you need to be, or if you want to stay for the meeting.
I've taken that to my chair, slightly back from work.
Very fair. Yeah, yeah, that's very, very fair. Okay, so is it okay? I'm just going to bring item 12 forward, just to review a scrutiny work plan. So we'll go over the scrutiny work plan in more formally later. But basically, following on from what Councillor Jeffries has said, we have been approached by Gloucester City to set up like a joint scrutiny meeting. And we kind of don't really want to necessarily rush into things because we want it to be very considered and to take into account everything, like concerns that people will have. We want to make sure that it is equitable as well, so that Gloucester and Cheltenham have sort of like, we're fulfilling our obligations as joint stakeholders. And this is basically an opportunity, very early doors, for anyone to register interest in participating in a scrutiny committee. If you basically are aware of the area, it is quite sensitive in a way, just because there's a lot of economic opportunities that are drawn into it, potential housing needs. We don't know what the sale of the space is going to look like, so we have to make sure that we are kind of overseeing it as responsibly as possible. I really, really welcome anybody who would like to participate in that process. So again, you don't have to agree to it right now. We're going to be looking to having a meeting in sort of November, just to set things up. Ideally, we're just planning dates now. Councillor Pinniger, do you have anything you'd like to ask?
Yeah, so just to clarify, this is an overview and scrutiny meeting to provide oversight of what?
It's basically just going to be figuring out the terms of reference of, scrutinising the sale of Gloucestershire Airport, like the disposal of the asset. Yeah, okay, if that helps, yeah. Don't worry, all of this has been a bit up in the air, as Councillor Jeffries has said. Loads of it is coming out today, really. So this is very hot off the press. I don't want to overwhelm anybody, but it's just something to start thinking about, because we're getting slightly ahead of the curve on it. Is there anything else that we need to mention, or is that relatively okay?
No, I think that's fine. It's just whether anyone's got any questions for Pete as deputy leader. Otherwise, you can let him go if he wants to.
Okay. Again, no pressure to answer, because I realise it's an emerging situation. But does anyone have any further questions at this time for Councillor Jeffries? Councillor Day.
So this is a scrutiny of the sale, disposal of the airport. So does that mean, where are we then with the sale or disposal? Does that imply that it is happening?
From my understanding, the airport from Chelmsford's perspective, has always been up for sale. The council took that decision, I believe. The request came originally from Gloucester as an invitation to the leader to a 10-day scrutiny meeting. Those dates clashed. And like I say, Rowena, I think, put the suggestion back to Gloucester, actually, why don't we have a joint, why would you scrutinise Gloucester's piece of that puzzle? Why don't we have a joint scrutiny look at it? So the IE putting it back to Gloucester that our scrutiny members join their scrutiny members for an overview of the sale of the airport. Is that the clarity you're after?
I guess all the stuff, to be honest, I've seen in the media suggests it's not for sale at the current time. Is that correct?
I'll just defer to the monitor. Obviously, they know the actual legal situation.
Shall I just try and help a little bit? So there was a decision taken by the council a few years ago now to dispose of the airport. We are kind of proceeding on that basis. However, it's not officially on the market as yet. We're still going through the process of instructing agents, etc. In the meantime, obviously, particularly around the sort of election, there was quite a big change in administration at Gloucester City. So quite rightly, new members and returning members who are now in different seats, shall we say, have got lots of questions about how it's all going to work and what it's going to look like. And also about, the airport as an ongoing concern. So they wanted to do a scrutiny around that, as Councillor Jeffries said, invited Councillor Hay along to that, but took the view that actually it was probably be better if we did it jointly, because actually we were both shareholders. Gloucester City and Cheltenham Borough Council are both shareholders in the airport, so actually it would make sense if we did that as one piece of work together, so that everybody, members across both councils, are getting the same answers at the same time. Does that help?
Yes.
Are there any further questions at a point, or does that clear most queries up? Are we fairly happy with that? Okay. Please feel free to, if you have any closing comments, Councillor Jeffries, then please feel free to make them. Otherwise, you and your back are spared. Thank you so much. It's been super helpful. Thank you so much. So basically, we'll just move on to item 6, matters referred to committee, which we don't have any of. So we'll move straight over to item 7, which a lot of people have been really interested in. So it's quite nice to get cracking on that. the biodiversity duty first consideration report. So this covers pages 13 to 36 of your agenda pack. And we're mostly going to be examining our current management arrangements for our green spaces alongside best practice, so sort of examining what else is happening in the industry and across the landscape of it in terms of biodiversity and wildlife management. So I've been really excited about this. I'd really like to introduce Javier Guerrero, our planning policy officer, and Malcolm Walls as well, please, who's our community parks development officer, to address the committee if you want to make a quick overview of your work and this project. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, just to do a brief introduction, because I think, firstly, thank you for Overview and Scrutiny for identifying this as a topic. And I just wanted to kind of, one, apologise that this isn't a fresh paper, because actually serendipity is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And we were actually preparing a report called the First Consideration Report on Biodiversity. So it's a very technical name for actually what the ask of Overview and Scrutiny Committee was. So what we've done is killed two birds with one stone, I'd like to say. And so we have brought the First Consideration Report to you in responding and answering, I hope, to your question. I'd also just like to take the opportunity to thank Javier and Malcolm, because a huge amount of work has actually gone into preparing this report. I think it's fair to say that the tentacles of the work that we do as an organisation corporately spreads beyond just individual teams. So what you've got before you, I hope, is a comprehensive, I hope you see it as a comprehensive report. Javier and Malcolm will go into more detail, and I'm happy to answer more questions. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of set out the kind of context for how that report has got to you in the way it has. But I'll pass to Javier. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Hi to the committee. Well, my name is Javier Guerrero. I'm a planning policy officer here in the planning policy team. I'm here with Malcolm from the Green Space team. We want to introduce this report to you because we think it's a good opportunity to tie in with the committee's work plan. We've been asked to, as you mentioned, Chair, examine the current management arrangements and the best practice in biodiversity and wildlife management. Well, the request from the committee is part of the report's content, so I will talk more on the biodiversity side of things, and Malcolm will talk more about the green space side of things. First, I think, yeah, it's a technical term, so what is the biodiversity duty? It's in page 3 of your reports, but as a summary, public authorities such as CBC, originally we had the duty to conserve biodiversity, but since the Environment Act amendments in 2021, we now have a strengthened biodiversity duty to conserve and enhance biodiversity. And this is specified in 3 obligations. The first one is to consider what we can do to conserve and enhance biodiversity. The second one is to agree policies and specific objectives based on our consideration. And the third one is to act to deliver policies and achieve our objectives. So this report feeds into that and serves as a compilation, a summary of actions, documents, policies, partnerships, B&G information, for example. This is being produced by, it's a new report that different public authorities need to do since the amendments in the Environment Act. So we have compiled all these different obligations in a structured in chronological order, and it has actions since 2006 until up to this year. So the first consideration is called by that name because it serves as a baseline. So it's in practice report 0, with the first full report to be produced by 2026. The reports then will be reviewed the actions in the reports need to be reviewed every 5 years, and this will be published in the website of the council. So the report has many actions. But we want to highlight some of the actions. And I can talk about the partnerships. I can start with that. That is on page 17 and page 18. So I will mention two. The first one is the local nature recovery strategy. We are part of that effort. The acronym is LNRS, and they are emerging across England as of now. And locally, the LNRS for Gloucestershire is being delivered by the County Council. And we expect to be receiving a draft late October, so late this month, or early next month, November, so in a couple of weeks from now. This will be a cornerstone document for nature, biodiversity, because it will be informing both the strategic and local policy. So it will serve as an evidence-based document for the plan-making process. And the second one is that since November last year, we're collecting payments from the mitigation strategy of the Cotswold Beechwoods Special Area of Conservation. And in April this year, the Cabinet approved to bring these plans forward to mitigate recreational impacts on the Beechwoods. For example, as mentioned in the strategy, the motorists, dog walkers, some examples in the strategy. Malcolm can talk about the green space management part, please?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of different partners to protect and enhance biodiversity across Cheltenham. We've got UBCO, we've got other council officers and teams, Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, and a lot of volunteer groups as well. We work with them to monitor and to improve biodiversity on different sites, looking at how people use the sites as well, and trying to put in more biodiversity improvements that, meadows, bulb planting, while looking at UBCO's operational capabilities and also cost implications on different contracts. It's quite a wide aspect that we do. What this report is doing is pulling that all together. And also, we're already doing a lot of things. Recently, the transformation of the long gardens from our annual bedding scheme into a perennial scheme is another step to improving biodiversity in the town centre. And yeah, looking at all of those different best practices, not just what we're doing, because we've been doing transforming the bedding into perennial schemes since 2017, but it's looking at other best practices in local authorities to, change some of our maintenance techniques. So looking at the way we cut grass, length of grass heights, and yeah, it's quite a wide spectrum of things we do. But one thing that we're doing at the moment is we're coming up with guidance documents that UBCO and volunteers and ourselves we can follow, and also help educate members of the public of what we do and why we do it for the betterment of biodiversity in the environment.
Thank you so much. It's really great hearing about the work that you're doing. And it's also really great. Thank you for working with UBCO as well to redistribute the planters as well. So you're building nature corridors about that. I think that's a really innovative idea. So just checking, did Councillor Chellan, you sent some questions in advance and received some replies? Is there any follow-up you'd like to make to that? Okay, that's really cool. So we can open the floor to discussion a little bit. Is there anyone who'd like to kick off questions? Councillor Pinniger and then Councillor Day. Thank you.
Well, I think it's a wonderful report. I'm really pleased to see the references to all of the different steps that have taken place since 2006. That's fantastic, because so often when I'm trying to look into a matter with the council, I've got to go and find all those documents myself, and they refer to each other and there are no links, and you've got to go and root them out. So that's so useful. I didn't go back and read all of them, but I do have a few comments, maybe additions, or maybe questions. So I think Ian Doby mentioned this, Councillor Doby mentioned this before the election when it was his role, that there was some kind of vision statement like Cheltenham, a town in a park, or a town in nature, you know, some kind of marketing vision statement that we could also have in here, I would have thought, because that's quite nice. I thought you could have expanded on working with volunteer groups. I probably should declare an interest. I'm chair of the Friends of KGV playing fields, but you just mentioned volunteers. Maybe be a bit more specific. It's a fantastic effort. There are 18 groups, I think, across the parks and rivers. It's really amazing, and the newsletter's fascinating to read. I wanted to ask about the pocket of land on Milton Avenue and check that is included. I think, do you know the one that I mean, Malcolm? It's quite close to the Griffiths Avenue Nature Reserve as the crow flies, but it's got a lease on it that is apparently due to expire at some point, and it's been left to go totally wild for like 99 years. And it's got all kinds of wildlife in there, like woodpeckers, the ones I think of the most because I've seen those, but it is really very wild. I don't know if that's included in your mapping or if the property department know what's going on with that lease. And finally, and this is a big one, and it's probably out of scope, but I wanted to mention that in terms of biodiversity, the biggest impact on biodiversity and nature loss in this country is food production and farming, but there is nothing in here about diet or food that's provided by the council, and what the impact of that is, because I believe, you know, that's the biggest threat to nature, basically. So we should probably at least say we've discounted it in some way if we're going to, or mention it, basically. Thank you.
You happy to give some response?
I'll take away the Milton Avenue question. I believe we own it, but I'll just clarify that. And the food production, we could probably add allotments to the list. Yeah, we'll look at that question a bit more, see what we can put in there.
If I come back to the town in the park reference, I think that's been littered in lots of documents, actually. And I think, of my memory, I think it even might be referenced in the local plan, as Cheltenham is known as a town within a park. So I think we can certainly look to weave that in somewhere. Not sure where it originated from, though, so that might be interesting to go and find that out.
Thanks so much for that. Just building on your point about volunteer capacity, Councillor Pinniger, I have actually received some feedback recently from a working group that they're aware of a lot of people on the waiting list for allotments, and they were wondering if we may be able to do an outreach campaign to sort of say, while you're on the waiting list for allotments, if you wanted to do green space volunteering, because there's also a lot of similar programs with green gyms where people kind of do gardening work or conservation volunteering work, just to kind of supplement their own exercise programs. if you feel that may be feasible, it would be quite interesting to sort of investigate that. I don't want to take up too much time for Councillor Day's questions, so Councillor Day, if you wanted to give your own questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm also like to talk about volunteers. So no, thank you very much. So I welcome this report, and I think it includes lots of really brilliant stuff that I'm very passionate about. And one area that I think the council, can and should do more on, that is mentioned in the report, as Councillor Pinniger said, is supporting and enabling volunteer groups, Friends of Parks, etc. And I think rather than the council seeing it as a cost, we should see it as an investment in allowing a lot more activity to occur than would otherwise be possible. And what I'm thinking about specifically, because I'm doing what I can to help my local Friends of the QE2 Park group, is helping friends groups to meet the cost of insurance so that they can work in our green spaces without the presence of council staff, because that would just unlock so much more additional time, which is effectively, a free labour force, for the council. But the reason the volunteers want to do it is because they receive enormous, personal benefits themselves. And I'm just thinking also of the example of the last year's ice rink, which I think was a net cost to the council of about £74,000, but was worthwhile because of the wider economic benefits it brought. And I just think, this is an area with the volunteer groups where we should be adopting a similar mindset, both in terms of the ecological gain, biodiversity gain, but also the well-being of the volunteers and everybody who visits our green spaces. And I think as well, we all need to be conscious that many residents in the town, unfortunately, are unable to access nature outside of the town due to financial and health constraints, and maximising the biodiversity within the town, which your report is all about, would help all our residents to access and experience well-being gains. So all I'm asking really is if that's something you would take away and have a think about, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. The portfolio holder who covers green spaces, Councillor Telford, he's not here today. It's not a response I can give to you now, but obviously I'll take that away and have that comment, and I'll raise that with Councillor Telford. What I would say is hopefully what you get from the report is actually the amount of volunteer hours that actually does take place within the town. I think it's also important to recognise the oversight and the importance of the oversight of the green space team. So I think it's fair to say, Malcolm, we've got some really energetic volunteers, but all our volunteer suites need guidance and oversight, because obviously there's different tasks that go on within our parks, green spaces and gardens. And obviously having free rein over all of that activity needs some degree of management. So I think there's a balance there. And I think it's important that we retain that oversight through the green spaces team. I think it's also important to recognise that our volunteers come in all shapes and sizes. And obviously we need to think about their health and safety as part of that process. So you'll probably be aware that we've been reviewing health and safety policies overall, and certainly the role of volunteers as part of that is an important element. So I just wanted to kind of just highlight that there is a balance to be reached in terms of making sure that we get the right activities happening within the parks, gardens and open spaces.
Thank you so much, Councillor Chellin. And was there anyone else who had any questions if you're okay to just... Oh, do you have a follow-up? Oh, yeah, Councillor Day, if you want to go ahead, and then Councillor Chellin.
Just very quickly. I totally agree with everything you've said. And I would say I've had an absolutely brilliant experience in the QE2 Park with the Green Spaces team, who I think are tremendous ambassadors for the council. And really, I would just love more of them because they are just doing such a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, just a question. In 5.1, you mentioned the local green spaces, and I think, Javier, we've had a bit of an email discussion about this as well. And I was just wondering a bit more about how that works. You know, if you identify a local green space that isn't already on the list, you know, what is the process for kind of, especially if it, you know, doesn't belong to us, you know, how does that actually work?
Yeah, the local green space is a fixed process based on the MPPF and the PPG, like the planning policy frameworks. So within the process of a new local plan that we have right now, it's the opportunity to look at new local green spaces. But in order to select them and decide if we want to include them, because it will go then into an examination process, for example, for the local plan, we need to have a lot of evidence based on 5 criteria. That's on the planning framework. So it's important to the process that we can assess every space on their criteria. For example, biodiversity, recreation, community value. So that's the process that needs to follow. First, identifying how they can fulfill all these criteria in the framework.
Sorry, do you want to go ahead? Thank you.
Just 2 quick things from me. I think to kind of echo what Councillor Pinnigan Day was saying, I think it'd be really valuable in the report to see kind of what support mechanisms we have and what help we actually provide community groups, because it's kind of stated throughout and it's alluded to. But I think it would potentially encourage other community groups to come forward and present themselves, just kind of support our green spaces a bit further. So I'd really like to see that, what exactly we do in order to support them. The other thing is in the action plan for the update. So it's mentioning how we've been removing kind of invasive species, the Himalayan balsam, if I'm saying that correctly. And in the section just above, we're also stating that we've planted 1,000 trees and further 600 with a mix of native and non-native. So my assumption would be if we're encouraging kind of biodiversity in Cheltenham, it should be native species, which will survive here, but also are in keeping with what we'd expect naturally. So in terms of the criteria for selecting non-native species, and do we prioritise native species above these?
Yes, we would prioritise native over non-native. I think that question around the non-native is trees, and as we know, climate change is happening. We're getting hotter weather here, so we're using things a bit more from Europe to sort of combat that.
Do we have any other questions at this time? So I've got 1 or 2. Oh, Councillor Collins, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Only if everyone else has had an opportunity to say or ask what they wanted to, because I think it's appropriate to allow that, and then for me to perhaps come in right at the very end. Is that okay? Right. Well, as I say, you've all had your say, which is really good. So thank you for your contributions. But I would, and I think it's important, I would like to thank the team for putting together what I think is an excellent report. And I've seen lots of reports over the years, and they're not always as good as this, okay? You can see there's a lot of passion in the team as well, which I think is nice. It's important, but if you can have passion too, that's great. Just a reminder, this is a draft 0 document. It's not the finished article. You have the opportunity, as do all the other members, to make contributions to it. So I'd like to thank you for your constructive and helpful questions, but do bear that in mind. You know, you're not going away from here this evening and it's not a done deal. I would say in my own ward, we've got a group of volunteers that work in Benard Open Space once a week, and there's lots of work, tea, coffee, cakes. There's a community group that's formed out of it, and they all, you know, the majority of them turn up every single week. And they also, although they're volunteers, they do work alongside members of the team as well. And when it started, and no one's picked up on this yet, but when it started, I got emails from concerned residents. What's that lot doing over there destroying the park? Why are they ripping that up? And I went, well, I'll find out. And nothing gets done without permission of Malcolm and his team. And quite often, as I say, there's somebody from the team there to supervise and to say, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that. So that's important as well. It does look much tidier, I must admit. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, guys. And as I say, it's not a done deal yet. So there's going to be loads of opportunities to change this document to something that we're all happy and comfortable with. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thank you for clarifying that. I think it's quite useful because, again, this is just the kick-off point, really. And if there's any other questions or suggestions that you have, it's really useful to just generally feed them in. I have had a couple of questions from Councillor Allen, who's unfortunately not able to be here today just due to a work commitment, if it's okay to ask them on his behalf. He was wondering about the ash dieback, because obviously that's like a big cause for concern, and it's quite frustrating that I think you're right that we're going to see like fairly rapid deterioration. I think it's quite good to get a mix of more resilient plants in their place. He was wondering if we had any data figures on the sort of size and scale of dieback at this stage, like within the Cheltenham boundaries, and particularly the impact on other wildlife, because there'll be many other kind of organisms and sort of species that are dependent on ash trees. You know, like I can't even begin to, you know, elaborate on that. It's so complex. But his third question was also if our current nature recovery SPD, like our supplementary planning document, encompasses the prior SPD of around a half decade ago. If you're able to give any comment on that, that would be really helpful. But no worries either way, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So on ash dieback, we actually have an ash dieback management plan. And if it's helpful, I can share the link. It's on our website to Overview and Scrutiny, so you can have sight of that. And we actually appended it quite recently because Councillor Collins recently made a member decision which signed off a trees protocol, which identified how we monitor our tree stock across the borough. But of course, ash dieback is quite a significant issue nationally. So we do have quite a stock of ash dieback. We've got quite a lot on Leckhampton Hill. We've got quite a bit of ash in Ben Hall Woods, and we've got elements of ash elsewhere in the town. The good news is our prediction around the impact is not as great as we anticipated it to be. So ash dieback in our area, that's not to say it's not as great in other areas, but in our area, the impact of it is not as what we predicted. So, but there has been work undertaken. So you will have seen felling, for example, on Leckhampton Hill, where there's been clearance work looking at that. But we do have a management plan relating to it. We also have a defined budget. So we've been planning for this for a number of years. So we have an annual budget specifically focused on ash dieback, and we're monitoring how we utilise that budget as well. It may be that at some point in the future we might have to make a request in terms of further budget, but that's not the case at the moment, and we're managing it within the budget that we've got available to the council. The important element as well is, you know, picked up is around what species then replace those trees that are removed. But if it's helpful, I can share both the tree protocol, I think you'd be interested in that, and the ash dieback management plan. So there's regular monitoring that goes on in terms of our stock. In terms of the borough. In terms of the nature recovery supplementary planning document, that is a document that it's in the corporate plan. in terms of an objective for this council to deliver. We've been working on a brief for that piece of work. The reason why it's not completed at the moment is you've heard from Javier earlier, is there's quite a lot of work. For example, the local nature partnership, for example, is doing quite a lot of work. And what we don't want to do is we duplicate. So we've held back, and in conversation with Councillor Collins as the portfolio lead, we've just held back on that at the moment because we just want to kind of make sure that we address it in the right way. The risk that we also have with that SPD is that it's not, what we can't do in a supplementary planning document is create new policy. We need to do that through the Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury Strategic and Local Plan. So again, there's a timing issue there. We do think it will be a useful part of the evidence base to inform the strategic and local plan process. So certainly it's one that's in evolution, I would probably say. Haven't got a timetable on that as yet because we just want to make sure that we get our ducks in a row, really, and we don't commission a piece of work that actually is not making a positive contribution. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's really informative. Thank you. Are we all happy with that discussion? And we're happy to. Amazing. Genuinely, thanks so much for all your hard work on this. This is really, really appreciated. I'm really excited to sort of see where it goes next, but please keep us in the loop. This is really exciting for us. Hope you have a really great evening. Thank you. Cool. So I think we basically, just to summarise, we don't have to make any decision on this, but again, if any sort of other insights occur to you, please do feed them back. That would be really, really helpful. So we can move on now to item number 8, which is our grants policy. So we're just we're trying to have a more integrated work programme that examines cabinet considerations. And so we've basically selected this to try and make sure that we have a bit of a look at it, just to see if there's any feedback you'd like to offer. If it's okay, I'd like to invite Claire Hughes just to introduce, just to address the committee and introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so perhaps a slightly drier subject than biodiversity, but so I think as a council, one of the things that we're quite proud of is the fact that we've got quite a good community grants programme, and we give out quite a lot of money, and also that we receive funding in from third parties and we passport that on to a significant number of community groups as well. One of the things that we, despite all of that great work, one of the things that we need to make sure is that we've got a really good structure around that in terms of our governance processes, so that we can make sure that we're obviously doing all the right due diligence checks, that we're making sure we're monitoring where that money's going, making sure it's delivering the outcomes that we want it to deliver, whilst minimising kind of any risk to the authority, and acknowledging obviously that we are trusted with these public funds, and we need to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing to make sure that, as I said, we're minimising the risk but getting that greatest benefit for our communities. So this policy is kind of really a starting position in terms of bringing forward that structure around how we bring grants forward. So it's not just about grant funding that we've got that we're giving out, it's also about when we're applying for funding. So we quite often will apply to government, for example, for funding as well. It's making sure that we're having those conversations before we just go stick applications in and then realise, oh, whoops, there's a match funding requirement in there that we perhaps didn't consider, or things like that. So it's making sure we've got a really robust structure. The policy will be supplemented with a grants toolkit, which is still in development, but will provide much more of those kind of usable resources for the team in terms of, you know, these are the forms that I need to fill in and that kind of thing, in terms of making sure we've done boring things like subsidy control checks and all that kind of thing. And, you know, we've checked that the group's got a constitution and they're properly set up. And if they say they're a charity, they are a charity, and all of those kind of things that we need to be doing. So it'll be supplemented by that. I think moving forward, there's probably a bigger piece of work to do around grants in terms of what do we want our grants to look like in the future. So, you know, we give grants out sometimes year after year, and that might not be, you know, perhaps, I think one of Jackie's questions was, you know, does that mask some of the sustainability of some of the groups? And perhaps it does. So there's probably a piece of work to do in the new year around, you know, do we want to be giving the grants out to these same groups if they're making multiple requests, or do we actually want to do something slightly different, work with them on this, a future more sustainable model? So there's a bigger piece of work to do, but I think this puts us on a really good footing to get things moving. It also makes sure that we've got that really good separation in terms of the decision making and the sort of payment, so there can be no suggestion that anybody was involved in making a decision and making a payment. And it's also going to bring in, which we already do for some grants, but not all, a more sort of panel-based decision-making process. So it won't be sort of just an officer decision, we're going to give it to this group and this group. It'll be more of a panel that will involve members as well as officers around how we distribute funds moving forward. So I think that's a very quick summary. Thank you very much to Councillor Chellion for all of your detailed questions. Hopefully the answers were sufficient, but if you've got any more questions, feel free, and of course happy to take questions. As Councillor Joy said, this report is actually going to Cabinet at the end of November for them to hopefully approve the policy. So if you do have any recommendations that you want me to put forward to Cabinet from this committee, I'm happy to do so.
That's really exciting. Genuinely not dry at all. Thank you so much. That's really class. So, Councillor Chellion, did you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask? Amazing. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to dive in with any questions or suggestions? Councillor Day, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably just a couple of points of clarification, really, more than questions. And I think because I'm a new councillor here. So are any of the grants kind of out of the council's own resources? Oh, okay, because I kind of got the impression most of the money is come from external sources, NHS, central government. And I suppose I was just wondering if it ever goes wrong with a grant, which may happen from time to time, I just wondered if there's any kind of financial exposure to the council. Would the NHS or central government, be looking to the council to make good any losses through fraud or error?
Yeah, so you're right, quite a lot of the money is money that comes in and we passport on, but we do have our own community grants programme, and I can't remember the figure off the top of my head about how much it is, but I'm looking at Richard because he might know.
30 quid.
Yeah. So we have that, but that's for our community pride grants, isn't it? But we also have other grants that we give out each year to. So, for example, we give some money to the Everyman, we give some money to GRCC. So we've got those grants that we're giving out year on year as well. And in terms of exposure, yes, there is always a risk to us because we're kind of like acting as a bit of an accountable body, for want of a better phrase. So hence one of the reasons for bringing this policy in is to make sure that we've got that really robust monitoring. At the moment, there is some potential for us to be exposed to a bit more risk because we're passporting money on, and some of the checks back have not perhaps been as robust as we might like them to be. So that's why one of the reasons that we're kind of bringing this policy forward is to make sure that we are absolutely minimising that exposure to the council. And if we can say, well, we were doing these checks and things like that, if something does go wrong, then at least we've got that level of additional protection back to us.
Sorry, just I had a second question, I suppose I had, is I think this came out of an internal audit recommendation. And I saw that Counter Fraud and Enforcement Unit are included as a consultee. I just wondered if internal audit will be casting their eye over it, just to make sure the policy does tick all their boxes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it did come from an audit, that's correct. And we've been developing this. We have been working with our Counter Fraud colleagues, but also with our internal audit colleagues, so we can make sure that we've ticked all the boxes in terms of the recommendations that they made as well.
Councillor Pinniger, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. This is really well written and I've been trying to pull holes in it and I really can't. It seems to have everything in. It seems to have the monitoring and reporting as well as all of the grant things. The only point I would make is that when we did have to constitute our group in order to get a grant, but volunteer groups have a very hard time getting a bank account. And the Green Spaces team held the money for us to buy the benches in our park. So here it just says grants can only be made to constituted groups or organisations with a designated business bank account, but actually the council will hold the money if it's for council business, presumably, but that could go in as well. If that's up to 6.6.2.
Yeah, I'll take that away. Yeah, what we can't do is give grants to individuals, so that's probably why we would hold it sometimes on someone's behalf. But yeah, I can certainly add a little bit of text in around that. That's fine.
I have a couple of questions. Does anyone want to intercede before I go off on one? All good for me to go off on one? Amazing, thank you. So I was kind of thinking that if we're going to be evaluating our general approach to grants policy, are we going to be taking any sort of steps of inclusion measures proactively? Because there are some people who may have community groups that they sometimes feel as though they're a bit left out, like if they're not somehow in the circle of engagement, if they're sometimes overlooked. Do you have any sort of strategy in place to potentially address those sorts of situations?
So I think we need to scope what that bigger piece of work looks like yet. But what I would say is Richard's team in particular spend a lot of time trying to understand what groups we've got and making sure that they are included in the right conversations so that they do get those same opportunities to bid in when they arise. And we this year, I can't remember how many it was, but we were massively oversubscribed for our community pride pot, hugely oversubscribed. And, you know, we'd love to be able to give money to everybody, but unfortunately we can't. But one of the things it's important that panel does when it's looking across those applications is to make sure that there's an equitable process and that all of the relevant groups are captured. But we still much need to do a lot of scoping around that wider piece of work. And there may obviously be a role for scrutiny in that as we move forward if people would be interested. I'm sure they would.
And as part, if you are going towards a panel process, are you going to have independent members of the public as well as councillors, I presume? Like, what's the sort of balance the mix going to be like?
So it will vary depending on the type of grant that we're talking about. But what we do try and do is bring somebody independent. So, for example, if it's around sort of the voluntary sector, we might bring somebody from the VCS in so that they are represented on the panel. GRCC sometimes might sit on there, for example. So it's making sure we do have that element of independence as well as just using officers and members.
Cool, thanks. Is everyone fairly happy with that? Is there any other feedback? Oh, Councillor Chillen. Councillor Day, did you raise your hand? Councillor Clamp, are you okay? Okay, Councillor Chen, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Sorry, it was just prompted by something you said, Claire. And I suppose in terms of the criteria, the decision making, I suppose we don't want the grant funding to be distributed to mitigate deficits in areas that should otherwise be supporting that activity. So just, can you reassure us of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all going to have to go through through due process. But yeah, we don't want to be just giving it out willy-nilly, if that makes sense. So yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think that there's anything to worry about there.
Thanks so much. That's really comprehensive. So we don't require a decision on this. But again, if anyone has any recommendations ahead of the cabinet decision, please do let us know. It'd be quite useful if anything occurs following this discussion. So this is another really exciting one on the agenda. Item 9 is our scrutiny task group tackling multiple deprivations. So this is the progress report. This has been a really, really interesting and really useful piece of work as well. Since we've had a report that was submitted following a task group in process. So anyone who may be new to council this year, this has been a long-running iterative programme of basically identifying needs within the community, because we do have at least 2 wards that suffer from, significant deprivation, and there are other pockets of poverty and sort of like people struggling who probably wouldn't have done in up until very recently. So we're trying to be very proactive in responding to that. I would really like to express my appreciation for all of the work that's been done by officers and participants to all of the discussions, because genuinely it's incredibly valuable. We have Richard Gibson here, who's our Head of Communities Wellbeing and Partnerships, just to speak to us tonight. And we just kind of wanted to reflect a bit on the success of measures that we've been taken, any kind of barriers to implementing recommendations and things that the report identified. So if you'd like to, thank you so much for coming here today. Would you like to give just a brief overview that's not anything that you may wish to kind of verbalise as opposed to having in the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try my best. It's quite a long report, so apologies for the length of the report and the detail it goes into. But I think it was a timely, it came around timely for us to actually review where we are. The report was tabled at Overview and Scrutiny Committee back in June 23, so what's that, 15, 16 months ago. As you know, the report covers 21 actions across 5 themes. So it was actually quite beneficial for us to go through and actually reflect where we are across those themes. Just before I dive into the summary of progress, I just wanted to give you a bit of context. Now, I've tried to include that in section 3 of the covering report, just some up-to-date information that wasn't made available at the time to the Scrutiny Task Group. And this is just given, in open fashion, so it will help you with your discussion later on. I've broken that section down into sort of cost of living, health and education. But some of the data is quite interesting. Obviously, cost of living, you will know as much as I that cost of living is still an issue for many of our residents. There's data in there about the number of households who are still continue to access our food banks on a weekly basis. And it really is surprising that what was set up in COVID times as an emergency response is still there and is still very much needed by our communities. And there's a graph there that just shows that in terms of the food bank number of parcels, how that has increased following COVID. Health inequalities is an area that is quite rich in data. I think you can show there's a bar chart there that shows potentially up to a 10-year life gap in life expectancy between, I think it's particularly males, living in our most deprived communities when compared to our least deprived communities. A 10-year life gap, that's quite significant. And I think that's one of the themes that the review group really got to grips with, was the differentials in opportunities and outcomes for our residents that is geographically based. And then just turning quickly on around No Child Left Behind, we've commissioned some additional needs analysis, which is helping No Child Left Behind think about where its priorities lie. I think you can still see the extent to which some of our children growing up in certain areas of our town are living in poverty, 30% of children in Oakley and Hester's Way. We can see that the proxy measures of free school meals, how some of our schools, I think it's Hester's Way, 56.8% of their pupils are on free school meals. And when you compare that to other schools in the town, where the number of children is negligible. Over the summer, we worked with the national charity St Giles's Trust, who carried out some in-depth consultation work, speaking directly to young people, had a tremendous response, 578 responses. And some of the findings are worrying about how many of our young people are troubled about their future. They worry about their future, they worry about their education, they worry about not fitting in. And then, their feelings of safety and the areas of the town where they don't feel safe. And there's some areas mentioned there in the report. Online safety, this isn't a subject for this item right now, but online safety is a real concern for many of our young people, as it is for many parents and adults. And we can touch on this later as we go through the report about how we respond to some of that information. So that's just a covering report. I don't intend to go through the progress report in detail, but I just thought I'd pull out some common themes for you to kind of mull over. And I think one of those, I've got a few here. One is the direct delivery that we're doing now. You will all know that we've brought housing back in, and I think the report exemplifies just the amount of work that our housing colleagues are doing, working with local residents to support them. And there's some great progress being shown here, you know, particularly our money benefits and advice service, and the work that our housing colleagues are undertaking on damp and mould. So bringing housing back in changes the dynamic when, compared to June 23, when housing was at arm's length. There's a much more direct relationship now with our residents across the piece. Data-driven, I think that's a common theme that comes out of this progress report. You know, we're not just doing a finger in the wind. We are looking at data. We're understanding needs and issues. We're looking at evidence and best practice and then taking action accordingly. You can see that in our response around health and wellbeing and also the work that we're doing through No Child Left Behind. I'd hope that the report also brings to life the work we do in partnership with a wide range of different agencies and organisations in the town and the power of those relationships. You can see that in the work that we do, for example, with our food partners, who are absolutely critical, as we've just touched on, and the work that we do in partnership around health, for example. There's lots of examples in here about partnerships and relationships. Another one around the ability of the council to take a strategic view, a strategic position, but then build a narrative around that. And I think you can see the success of No Child Left Behind around that. No Child Left Behind is very much a child poverty project, which could be very dry, but I think the work of No Child Left Behind has brought a coalition of partners to the table who are keen to get involved and willing to go the extra mile to tackle that issue. I think there's a success of bringing funding in. Claire's report we just heard about is all around the funding that we brought in through grant funding, about how we put appropriate governance measures on that. But we are successful at bringing money in. I think, and this report tells you some stories around the NHS funding, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. There's lots of good examples. And just finally from me, I was really pleased with just innovation. You know, we're continuing to innovate. I was really quite chuffed to read about the Code Ninjas at Oakley, which started out really small. I think it was £800 or something, but the work of our colleagues has led to a £20,000 grant and the ability of that project to scale up and do far more around that. And then at the other end of the scale, the work we're doing with obviously Golden Valley and the significant potential benefits of that social value approach that we hope will support many of our residents living in our deprived communities. So that's it from me, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
That was a really great overview. Thank you so much. That's kind of really firing a lot of the neurons in my brain. It's really comprehensive. Does anyone have any questions or any sort of feedback to kind of get started with? Councillor Chellan, you did ask a couple of questions. Do you have any follow-up queries or comments to make?
I suppose, yeah, Richard, thanks for answering that. And in terms of, yes, it's going to be the cabinet members who decide, you know, what the priorities are in future. So, yes, I suppose our keeping the conversation going with them is very important, isn't it? So thank you for that, yeah.
Councillor Penninger, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Richard, for all your efforts, not just the report. The whole thing is amazing. I did take part in the working group. I substituted on the education portion, and it was absolutely devastating, the information that we received, and this response was so important. And to see that the average household budget is, the average monthly deficit for a negative budget household has gone from minus £270 a month in 2019-20 to minus £365 a month in 23-24 is equally devastating. I'm glad that as a council and with our county partners, other partners, we do give 100% relief on council tax, which is something that not all authorities do. So that's at least £100 that better off that our residents should be. And sometimes giving money is what's needed, I suppose. Let me just scroll through. So, given that the situation has got worse by a long way, could you just comment on what our strategy is going forward? How are we going to continue and expand this good work? How can it possibly get bigger when our budgets as a council are also constrained? What are we going to do next, is what I'm asking.
Thank you for that question. I might have to refer you back to the written answer I gave. That I think this lies with Cabinet, and there are political choices to be made. We can supply the data, we can supply the evidence, but at the end of the day, it's Cabinet.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, Councillor Day, go ahead.
I mean, it's not really a question. It's just to say thank you for an excellent report and all the work you're doing. And I mean, I love data. And I mean, this data on, free school meal entitlement in some of our schools was a real eye-opener for me, really shocking, as was the variation in life expectancy tables. And I mean, I think it would be quite an eye-opener and shocking to a lot of our residents in Cheltenham because, we have, I guess, this reputation, this impression as being a very affluent town. But, within our lovely town, we've got some real issues here that I think, generally, many people are just unaware of, just because they haven't seen the data. So thank you very much for everything you've done. Thank you.
Yeah, it is very much appreciated. I think in some ways the challenge of this is that it's really not a kind of an achievement of itself. The fact that there's so much work to do as a result of this, it sometimes feels a bit. I think I do feel the weight of responsibility that we have to carry this forward because it can't just exist as an own entity unless we make successes of all of the issues that you have identified. So I also really want to second my appreciation for that because it is a lot of arduous emotional labour to go through. And the fact that you've also been diligently in contact with a lot of people who are directly working with affected families, I think that's like a really, really big deal. I don't want that to be overlooked. Because we have been really, you have been very proactive in ensuring that you're centering the needs of the most affected people. I was kind of was wondering a little bit if you've been collating data throughout this process. I'm assuming that any slightly more experimental or innovative schemes we're taking on, that you're kind of recording how well it's progressing and what sort of measures have seemed to have kind of almost disproportionately positive impacts. Like, I think what stood out to me was the West Cheltenham Health Equity Project in item 3.15. Just the fact that that has grown quite a lot as an organisational strategy. If you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there are sort of similar projects that you feel may be experiencing growth and need extra support or could potentially adapt well to other areas, do you feel that you've been in a position to kind of effectively kind of share ongoing data on that or like sort of gather that so for general reflection in time to come? Because I'm also quite conscious that we want to check in on this in due course and sort of seeing what progress you're making, but ways in which we can support you as well. Have you been sort of keeping records of sort of like successful programs and sort of seeing how that could be expanded on?
Thank you for the question. I think monitoring and evaluation are great terms. I would reflect that we're very good at the monitoring, so we do collect a lot of data. Where we probably need to look at how we improve is around the evaluation, the actual, okay, So you've delivered X, Y, and Z as part of a project, but what does that actually mean? What is that telling us? How do we reflect on that? And how do we potentially change course? So I think evaluation is something, and this is not aimed at CBC, but I think it's across the piece, because lots of conversations I have with our health colleagues is around we need to get better at evaluation. So I think probably across the public sector is where I would say we need to get better at evaluation. Potentially the work that we do with the police as well, there's a lot of joint investment, joint plans with the police. So yes, Chair, I agree. Evaluation is really important, but it's probably something that we need to work collaboratively on with our partners and put some investment in. The challenge is to get good evaluation, it costs money because you need to bring people in. It's not something easily done by people who are directly involved in delivering projects. We can do the monitoring, but the best evaluation is independent.
I think that's a really good recommendation, because I think that ultimately, again, it's like investment, as we were discussing earlier on another issue. It's just the fact that we probably need to get more comfortable with ensuring that we're spending money and time and care on sort of identifying issues so that we are very well informed on how best to respond as well. I think that would be like a suitable investment strategy, because it just ensures that it kind of, the outcomes are like really deliverable and tangible sort of measures that we can take. Am I seeing anyone sort of like asking questions or raising their hands or anything? I don't want to be off in my own world of asking questions, but I was also kind of wondering, based on the report that you've given, I know it's quite hard to put to pitch it, but have I'm assuming you're kind of making some plans to adjust strategy. How do we go forward from this? So in terms of like the changing landscape, if there are any sort of less successful, or if there are measures we'd love to implement but it's just not practicable for us, is there any sort of changes that your team are kind of hoping to introduce to the recommendations that you've identified? The strategy will be taken on going ahead. If you're not in a position to commentate on that, that's totally fine though. Again,
Chair, I think that comes back to that question that Jackie raised about what does the next steps look like. So this is a public document. It's in the public domain now. I think there's conversations to be had about how we respond as an organisation, but that needs to go through the political framework. I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, I think that's very fair. Thank you. I should really have remembered that Councillor Chellan had asked a really well-informed question on it before. I just feel like I don't want to like reiterate it. Okay, I kind of feel like this covered most things. Please go ahead. That'd be amazing. Thank you.
And it's about children who fall through the gap. So and it comes down to the measures, the evaluation. We do what we can. Sometimes it feels like we're just, what's a polite way of saying it? We're just touching the edges of this problem. We're not getting to the heart of it. And I guess that the children who fall through the gap, through the cracks, should be picked up by GCC and Children's Services. Maybe it's not a question, but maybe there's some kind of evaluation you can do there, because you will see, if you can get figures from them, then that will reflect what we failed to do, in a sense, who we failed to help. Because that's kind of missing, isn't it? There must be a lot of people who don't receive help.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pinniger. And I think one of the trends that we've seen since COVID that you will read about in national papers is the rise of homeschooling, and we use probably homeschooling in inverted commas, of children that are being taken out of the education system due to, there are many reasons why children may be homeschooled, some of them perfectly legitimate and perfectly fine because that best suits the needs of that children, but there are probably other children that are being taken out for less good reasons, and they are a real worry, because once they're out of school, the oversight just is not there. And I think those are the real problematic children that, as you say, potentially are falling through the cracks and potentially end up as a statistic somewhere.
Councillor Clamp, go ahead.
Just a quick one from me. So similar to Richard, it's around the area of No Child Left Behind. So just reading through it, obviously the data is slightly depressing. But I was just interested in this section specifically in the context, in the national context. So we speak around children living in low-income families in Cheltenham and kind of eligibility for free school meals. But I was just curious how that compares wider county and nationally. And also in terms of especially worrying, sorry, a separate point, around the increase in the suspensions from schools. So obviously this further down the line brings on a whole plethora of further issues and, as you pointed out, probably other statistics. So I was just wondering, have we identified a specific kind of root cause in Cheltenham or something that we're seeing driving that increase, and kind of what steps have we put in place to try and avoid that further increase?
Thank you. So I don't have the figures to hand that will show the Cheltenham stats in comparison to maybe county, regional and national, but I can get hold of those and I can send them through. And I think the challenge is, if you look at the Cheltenham average, we're probably doing okay, but it's those differentials between some of our, say, the poorer communities and the more affluent communities where you see that those issues.
Oh, yeah. I think Richard's halfway through answering the question. Yeah.
Do you want me to go on about exclusion? I don't know. Did you want to come on that issue?
Yes, it's a very quick question. The indices of multiple deprivation, that was a study that was done in 2014 and then again in 2019. What happened? It's 5 years later and nobody's mentioning it. Is there anything going to replace it? Because we're relying on 2019 figures.
I agree. Yeah, that's a question you need to potentially put to the government. But yeah, it is a worry that we are, that we are using quite old data in terms of the indices of deprivation. Back to the exclusion question. So when we started off No Child Left Behind, the data that we had at the time was 2019, I believe, showed that Cheltenham was the highest excluding district in the county, and the county was the highest excluding LEA in the region. So we had a significant challenge with the number of exclusions. This was before COVID. The reasons, it was anecdotal at the time, so you can't trust this, you can't rely, and it's out of date anyway. But it was the presence of a grammar school and in Cheltenham, Pates, and the other grammar schools around the county. And we were hearing this from a head teacher of a state school, was that your best pupils are being creamed off into the grammar school system, leaving the state schools to compete quite aggressively at the time for the remaining students. And that was leading to a sort of arms race in terms of exclusions. I think that's not the case now. I think relationships are far better between the schools, albeit we still have the grammar school system. I think what you're seeing now is the sort of post-COVID challenge of a whole cohort of young people, children, predominantly, who missed out a vital part of their education and the socialisation. So what you're seeing, again, anecdotally, this isn't fact from me, but what you can read about in the papers are those behavioural problems and challenges that seem to be more common as reflecting, you're seeing that as schools responding to those.
Sorry. So based on kind of the newer data that it's above post-COVID. So why is Cheltenham specifically ailing from that? Because as you pointed out, you know, the whole deprivation of a couple of years of schooling was nationally, but why are we still seeing that maintained kind of higher rate? Do you know?
I might have to, dig a bit more deeper into the data. And I'm certainly not an expert in education nor on sort of exclusions. But if that's something, you know, through the chair, if you want us to go away and dig into a little bit more detail, speak to some people about those exclusion rates, then yeah.
I have to admit, I would be quite interested in that if that's all right, because I did attend the training session that St Giles Trust did on anti-exploitation measures, and just sort of seeing how easy it is for your living standards to deteriorate massively once you've been excluded. The fact that it also coordinates quite well with children in care as well. It's just really, there's just a couple of identifiable markers for anyone who's like at profound risk of sort of social, you know, like all kinds of like social drawbacks. If you are able to produce some data, that would be really interesting. Councillor Holiday, go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? I just wanted to come back on the chair's suggestion we just do a bit. I think there's another question is about what happens to children that are excluded. And there may be, again, perfectly legitimate reasons that children are excluded or suspended. Where are they? Is there sufficient capacity within the alternative school system, the alternative provision system, to meet that demand? So every child has a right to education. So anyway, that was just a potential hook for the chair, potentially.
Just to very briefly go back on that, because I was also intrigued about point 3.23, just mentioning about the education, health and care plan or statement. I'm not that familiar with that, and I understand, again, you know, we're not experts in education policy, but it would just a bit of feedback. It may be quite useful to have a bit of point of clarity what that would actually mean for somebody's quality of life or any support they may become eligible for if they have something like that. If there may be any sort of, you know, obstacles to them sort of receiving that kind of structure as well. I just kind of feel like it would be quite useful context to know what that means and if there's any sort of practicable ways of intervening to ensure they get the support that they need. Because I think somebody mentioned earlier that there are loads of people who are not receiving support that they should be eligible for. So that would be really helpful. Councillor Holiday, sorry, finally coming to you.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, when you're doing your information gathering on exclusions, maybe it would be helpful if it could be broken down into primary and secondary school. Thank you.
Thank you, that'd be class. Do we have any other questions at this time? Because I've realised that time's running on a little bit and we may get chucked out the building. Does anyone want to kind of finish up comments or questions, or all good? Amazing, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Richard. This has been really, really helpful. Are there any closing remarks you'd like to make just before you head off? But thank you so much for everything you're doing. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do as, you know, in our capacity, because we do really care about this. It's really nice seeing everyone engaging so much with this. So thank you so much. It's been brilliant. So we are drawing to a close a little bit now. We have received some feedback from other scrutiny meetings attended. Just to close off on item number 9, we don't need to make any decisions, but again, you know, if you have a reflection, have any other suggestions, then please make them. Heading on to item 10, feedback from other scrutiny meetings attended. You'll have received reports from the Gloucestershire Health ONS Committee, the Gloucestershire Economic Growth ONS Committee, which has just started meeting again, and the Gloucestershire Police and Crime Panel. I've received a question from Councillor Allen with regards to the Police and Crime Panel, so I'll pass that on to Councillor Atherstone for more clarity on it. We're trying to we had a really interesting session last month where we actually had a couple of attendees for these scrutiny meetings who were able to give us verbal updates. is anyone struck by sort of questions or follow-ups that they'd like to see redirected into these group sessions? If you'd like to raise any suggestions of, issues you'd like to kind of examine through those avenues. Is everyone fairly okay with them now? Councillor Chellan, go ahead.
So just a brief one, and I'm sure it's available, but in the economic scrutiny meeting, it's 6.2, it's talking about the presentation that the members got, which had quite a lot of data that had been collated from some other documents. So I suppose just clarity, how we can easily access that if we wanted to. I mean, I can contact our rep on there if you like.
Yeah,
We can find out for you.
yeah, we can handle that. Thank you so much for raising that, because it's just details like that that's really, really useful to have continuity on. So thank you for raising that. That's really helpful. Is there anyone else who had any suggestions to raise on that? Okay, perfect. So in terms of updates from scrutiny task groups to item 11, we don't have anything going on at the moment because I think we finished up with the housing transfer scrutiny task group. And in terms of item 12, the review of the scrutiny work plan, you will have had with your agenda the work plan. This is an iterative process. We're very happy to add or, sort of amend as we go along, particularly since so much of it is contingent on cabinet decision making. We've mentioned before about the Gloucestershire Airport. Again, if you'd like to have a bit of a think about how you'd like to proceed with any kind of scrutiny measures on that, that would be really, really helpful. But otherwise, if you have any ideas for the work plan that you would like to include, then please let us know, because we're really interested in hearing your views. We really, really appreciated having everyone pitching in on that and having your ideas suggested at the meeting a couple of months ago. So we're really excited to kind of have a more responsive way of doing that in time to come. So moving on to item 13, any other items that's determined to be urgent? I think that we're fairly well supplied for things to do. I don't think we need anything else on our plates. Nothing for me to raise there. Item 14, we'll be meeting again on the 25th of November at 6 o'clock. So I'm hoping to see people there. If you're happy to send questions in advance, it is quite useful just to kind of make sure that we're exploring all avenues. Sometimes I kind of have different questions at different times. So really, really value that. Councillor Chellan, if you have something to add.
Yeah, just a quick thing that one of our cabinet colleagues said he'd only seen the questions this morning. So I did wonder what the process was, because when we do send them in, it's by Wednesday lunchtime, and obviously it goes to the officers and they answer it. But apparently one of the cabinet member responsible was out of that loop. So maybe I should have copied that person in to my question.
No, it's up to the officers to.
Do you think we could have a point of clarity on that? So recommending to officers that, the cabinet member responsible or anyone else invited, do you think it's worth mentioning that? What do you think?
It's slightly different because most of the reports that come forward to scrutiny are officer reports as opposed to cabinet member reports, which is what you'd be used to in sort of council and that kind of thing. So it's a slightly different setup, which is why the officers do the answers. I would like to think that, generally it's relatively senior officers that are answering them, that they would kind of loop in their cabinet member as a needs basis rather than trying to dictate anything to them. I think we can rely on people's common sense and political awareness to make sure that they are looping the right people in.
I think I am quite conscious this is a bit of we're kind of massively expanding on our protocol of asking questions in advance, because I do kind of feel like it saves time within the meeting and makes sure that people have opportunities to express themselves. If discussion runs, it's all a bit unpredictable, but that can be something that's not managed. So Councillor Pinniger, were you about to ask something, or I can't remember if I saw your hand going? No, you're all good. Okay, amazing. And does anyone? Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's a good hint for we need to get out of here. Thanks so much for this, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Thanks so much. Thank you.